The leftist reactions to J.K. Rowling's statements that women are adult human females are remarkable and very revealing, and have caused something of a death spiral within online leftism. And online leftism is important because it is the cauldron in which the ideas are boiled, I suppose we'll say, and filter down to our politicians. Because our politicians are stupid. Yeah. As Christopher Hitchens put it, as soon as he started meeting politicians, he was surprised at how, frankly, unremarkable intellectually that they are. And he's not wrong. So this...
And they were a lot more remarkable, intellectually speaking, in Christopher Hitchens' day than they are in ours.
Oh my God, absolutely. Just look at some of the social media feeds, and again, thank God for social media in this regard, to see the dull class that we have these days. But anyway, so let's talk about this article that Owen Jones was compelled to write on Medium about J.K. Rowling, because he says the cycle is predictable. J.K. Rowling presses send tweet, and he then has to spend a lot of time trying to contradict her messaging. Welcome to my world, Owen, but for me, it's with you. It has become ever more fashionable to argue that trans rights is on a collision course with gay, lesbian, and bisexual rights. And it seems that's because it's inevitable. Right. Owen, you seem to be unable to avoid this, because inherent in the definition of what a trans right is that a male can be a woman and a female can be a man. This is a problem for the gay and lesbian communities and the feminist community, who predicate their entire arguments on what man and woman are. You can't really be gay if you can't identify what a man is.
That's a very good point.
You can't really be a woman's rights advocate if you can't define a woman. And so these are not bugs, these are features. These are inherent to the intersectional worldview. But the intersectional worldview is the latest progressive fad. It includes everyone. It allows us to map out a hierarchy of oppression and really protect the most marginalized. And so he says... complains that Rowling herself shared a tweet of a like-minded gay man denouncing gay rights organizations for supposedly undermining the very foundation of same-sex attraction. Yeah.
Wow, if my arguments were so easy to destroy in a single tweet, I'd probably have to rethink my worldview. I love the way they have to go after everyone who's like, negating their arguments and their existence and so on. Well, if it's so easy to negate, then maybe there's a problem with it.
Exactly. And how are they wrong when females can be gay men and you're a gay man, and vice versa for males and females? The answer really does boil down to, sorry, you're going to have to suck the dick, bigot. I know you're a lesbian, but that's a penis, and it's a woman's penis, and you're going to have to engage with it, or else you're a homophobe or transphobe or whatever it is. And so this is inevitable, of course. Bringing in the antonym into the definition of a thing means that you don't have a definition anymore. And so he says, it's worth explaining exactly why the T cannot really be separated from the LGB. And he says the argument against LGB and T unity goes like this. Sexual orientation and gender identity are two different things and should not be conflated. No.
That's not an argument, that's a diktat.
Yes, that's not the argument. The argument, as he pointed out that J.K. Rowling made, is that you are destroying the very nature and definition of what it is to be gay or woman or whatever by bringing in the T, the trans, because the trans presupposes a particular definition of these words that undermines all activism going in the other direction. And so he says the LGBT world is overly dominated by white, cis, gay, middle-class men, like him, and they are living with all sorts of prejudices, afflicting our minority. Racism, ableism, stigma towards people with HIV, misogyny, lesbophobia. This is for the entire LGBT catch-all umbrella term. Prejudice against gay men coded as camp or effeminate, and he goes on and goes on. And then he ends this with an example of a gay person discriminating against a Sikh person, saying, just because you were oppressed doesn't mean you can't simultaneously be an oppressor. Then why do we even use the word oppressed?
Yeah, maybe it's overly loaded.
Oppressed people are also oppressors. It's not normally how it works. You've really done a wonderful job of stirring in everything into a series of definitions. And so what we have to, in reasonable terms, say is that if someone is doing the oppressing, they're not oppressed themselves.
But I think you can also push back on that because, like with the Russian mafia example, you could have some underling who is oppressing the military base, but also being oppressed by his boss, who's oppressed by his boss.
Okay,
as
so
well.
we're saying
So that's predicating everything on a dominance hierarchy.
Okay, that's fantastic, and we're going to lean into that in a second. I like the way you say it. Right, so yeah, we are going to lean into a dominance hierarchy, but of course, this is the movement for equality. This is the movement to abolish hierarchies, and therefore, this is Owen Jones admitting that in fact, this is yet another hierarchy.
Yeah.
They are never going to escape it. It is inevitable that humans have hierarchies. And what would be good is to have accountable hierarchies of competence, as Jordan Peterson puts it, rather than merely ideological or physical dominance.
Yep.
But anyway, so he says you can't disentangle trans people from the LGBTQ plus experience for many reasons. Let's start. Many trans people are themselves lesbian, gay, or bisexual. So he's like, well, we exist and mix together. So that's not an argument. Blacks live among whites. So does Black Lives Matter have to do activism for oppressed white people now?
We're waiting.
So he says, but the reason above all else that we are bound together is because there is a common basis for our oppression. LGBTQ plus people are persecuted because we are all deemed to be traitors to our assigned gender identity. It's quite novel. I've never heard this argument before.
Not in that formulation, but it does fall into the usual thing, which is, the reason we're all together is because we're all oppressed. So there's no actual logical thing bringing us together, is what he's admitting. It's all an alliance of convenience in politics.
Yes, it's all contingent.
Yes.
When
the LGB argument is very much, there are things and perspectives and behaviors that these groups share in common.
Yep.
And then maybe that doesn't work with T. That's what the LGB movement is saying. And then he's coming in and saying, yeah, politics.
Yeah.
We're all together.
But there's also a necessary a priori argument with the LGBs, which is we are using consistent definitions to which we can all agree that do not damage our colleagues in the other categories. Yeah. In fact, it reinforces it. In fact, all of their arguments are based on the assumption that there can be a solid and essential definition that's based in some kind of biological reality, whereas the Ts are upending this completely. And so complaining, but we're all being oppressed by the same person. It's like, okay, sure. And let's assume the coalition can overthrow that oppression, right? Let's assume this is all true. What happens then? Well, the Ts still destroy the foundations of the LGBs. And so arguing that they can't be separated is wrong. It's absolutely wrong, even if they are all being oppressed in the same way, which I don't really agree. But I like, there's an interesting novel argument here. So the root of all of the oppression for all of them is apparently because they're traitors to their assigned gender identities, which is interesting because gay isn't a gender identity. It's a sexuality. Again, you're not doing a very good job here, Owen. Rooted of hatred against gay men, for example, the root of hatred against gay men, is that we have made the ultimate betrayal of masculine identity, which is to be attracted to and have sex with men. That's seen as the most unmanly act you can do.
Well, it depends on the culture, actually.
Yeah, I don't really agree with that,
yeah.
Frankly. I don't know where he's got this from, because, gay sex, in ancient Greece, it used to be incredibly manly to have sex with men.
In the Roman Empire, it was sexual passivity that was seen as unmanly.
Precisely.
So you could be an active sexual gay, and that doesn't make sense. You could be an assertive homosexual, and that would be seen as manly in Roman context.
Absolutely. And this is something that's been a thread that goes all throughout history, frankly. And so, I think that what it is he is in a sense right that it is the betrayal of the masculine gender role, but it is to become feminine and submissive, not to have sex with men, is the problem. Right, he's conflating the two, and the thing is, how do you explain internalized homophobia of gay men who also hate LGBTQ? Then, if that's the case, you can't really explain that. And it's a bit of a long-running joke that the most manly thing you can do is have sex with a man. Having sex with women is gay. Sorry, it's just it's a joke, obviously, but I don't really agree with him. But he says homophobia, you see, is the violent border guard of masculinity. It's an offshoot of patriarchy and misogyny.
That's not true.
No, it's not true. I love the genealogy of the leftist mind.
Yeah.
The street level violence against LGB and trans people is driven, and notice he's separated them there, is driven by the same impulse, a violent disgust at those who defy traditional gender norms and expectations. Maybe, but perhaps it was because you were offending against Allah, where trans people are not defying traditional gender norms, as the Islamic Republic of Iran explains to us.
So my understanding is in Iran, people will transition rather than declare themselves as homosexual because homosexuality is punished by the law in Iran.
Because Islam prohibits homosexuality, but it doesn't prohibit transitioning. And so it's not they will, it's they have to.
Wow.
If you're a gay man or if you're a man and you get raped, then you also get transitioned, apparently.
Wow.
So he says, it should be said that the lived experience of trans people is significantly worse than for gay, lesbian and bisexual people today. Traditionally, LGB people are on the receiving end of media campaigns portraying us as sexual predators, threats to children, defilers of biological reality, defined by mental illness, dismissed as an unsettling fetish, attacked as a tiny minority, imposing themselves on the normal majority, and so on. Moving on. As an attempt to separate the T from LGBTQ will fail because it is nonsense. It's not just wrong-headed, it simply collides with the lived reality of LGBTQ people. Exceptions may tell you otherwise, but that's all they are, exceptions. There is no LGB without the T. It is simply not a moral declaration, but a statement of incontrovertible reality.
He's literally made no argument there. That's just
correct.
Said, no, I'm right, guys. I'm right. I'm still right. I don't. No, it's just an exception. I'm still right.
And it's incontrovertible reality. We're going to talk about incontrovertible reality from the movement that thinks males can be women, are we? That's
Apparently
a bold statement. Literally, the modern intersectional movement does not believe in an objective, incontrovertible reality. They believe in lived truths and the epistemology of the oppressed. Mm-hmm. This is just, what are you appealing to, Owen? You have not refuted the central thesis that the two things are different and should not be conflated. They are different. But anyway, so he moves on. Literally, before we move on, if transgenderism means that the definition of man and woman has to include both sexes, then being gay literally means nothing at all. That means every heterosexual person could be gay if they just said it.
Yeah.
Right? It literally, there's nothing. And no wonder gay activists are concerned about this, being like, hang on a second. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so then this is one angle that that J.K. Rowling has just annihilated here, and shows that they are floundering, looking for a place to attach an argument. The next one is a Twitter beef between a YouTuber called Cat Black, who I actually kind of like, to be honest, and Vorsh.
Okay.
Cat Black is a relatively small YouTuber with a relatively small audience, but is more inclined to make anti-progressive statements.
Okay.
She used to, I haven't watched it for a few years actually, but she used to do these segments called Cat Black's Unpopular Opinions. And it was basically where she had to explain to radical leftists that, look, okay, I know what you're saying, and I know logically this may be true within our framework, but it's also nonsense and it's not going to work.
Right.
And so she goes on this unbelievably long Twitter rant about Vorsh, and it's not terribly interesting. Right. But there are some bits out of it that I think are worth picking out. There's literally like 100 tweets in this thread.
Oh my God.
But it's a novel, basically. But it is still quite interesting, because if you can scroll down a little bit, you can see where this all begins, because this begins from Vorsh going after J.K. Rowling. He had put all J.K. Rowling had to do was shut up and be the most uncritically beloved person for like a century. Women be quieter and start to apologize and challenge. Now,
that sounds a little misogynist to me.
Oh, that's the contention. It's quite amusing, though, because, it's obviously a joke, and it's quite a funny one in Vorsh's defense, which I never thought I'd ever say in Vorsh's defense, but okay. It is quite a funny one. And so she says, well, look, a few days ago, I made this tweet where I was asked why she, by the way, is transgender herself, right. I should point out, and I'm going to be polite about that. I asked transgender women specifically if misogyny, even when ironic, is helpful in advocating for transgender rights. My position was, and still is, that misogyny, even when ironic, is incredibly easy to avoid when advocating for trans women, especially against people who believe misogyny is the driving force for trans women. So the J.K. Rowling position, basically. And she's not wrong, obviously. Vorsh got picked up by J.K. Rowling, was made a big show of to her 14 million Twitter followers, and the argument is, well, look, it's misogynistic to bring men into women's spaces and have men being the face of women's activism, even if they put on makeup and call themselves women. This is an attack on women as a category and women's ability to represent themselves, and of course this leads us to the contradiction of, are women adult human females, or are women whoever claims to be a woman? And of course, trans women are women is Cat Black's position, because she's a progressive.
Yep.
And this is not something that can be avoided. But so she basically goes through this long thing saying, look, I think Vorsh is kind of gross, which is true, and says that, but she doesn't really care because why would you? It's just like,
Yeah.
I'm not a big fan of Mike Graham either, but I don't spend a lot of time criticizing him.
Yep.
As stated, she says, my issue with what he said is he was advocating for transgender women while citing misogyny, and I do not think that's helpful. And that's kind of true. But the thing is that, again, from Vorsh's position, if trans women are women, then telling women to be quiet is also telling trans women to be quiet.
Right.
And therefore, is it advocating for trans people? Because you're not treating them like women in your advocacy. But of course, it's ironic. So, who knows? So he came up with a hypothetical to apparently prove his point. And they have a back and forth in DMs, which I'm just going to skip over because it's very long. But she basically gets to the conclusion that, look, there's always a speck of truth in everyone's position.
Right.
And it's that allows the TERFs to focus on this and say, well, the people arguing for trans rights are misogynists, really, because they're attacking women. And Vorsh looks like that speck of truth when he's saying women be quiet, which is fair. And so she goes on and says, like I said, there's a speck of truth in the TERF arguments that trans women, the defenders, engage in misogyny, because you can't really deny it when Vorsh is one of the most prominent leftists online and is literally saying women be quiet. The extraction and overall argument they make is wrong, but these things happen, and I hold the position that Vorsh didn't need to be misogynistic in his defense of transgender people to Rowling. He didn't need to, that's true, but also it is more effective if he is, because he's pushing the buttons of the TERFs.
Yeah.
I like irony, and I have an incredibly dark sense of humour. I go to a lot of comedy shows and laugh at effed up S all the time, but I do not find that sense of humour to be productive in the advocacy work I do for transgender rights. That's interesting.
There is this contradiction here as well, because if you are a transgender woman who wants someone to stand up for you, do you want someone to be advocating for you on the basis that you are transgender while advocating against you on the basis that women should shut up and you're a woman, so you should shut up? Because there is this very strong contradiction here.
The implication is that the transgender person isn't actually a woman.
Exactly.
And this is the problem with their definitions. And this is entirely about their definitions. Because, Kat's not adverse to being a massive hypocrite about this. I spent a lot of time saying this the other day. I don't really care to be polite to transphobes. I think being rude to transphobes is a win-win. But I do think it says something when you jump to bigotry on your rudeness. Bigotry means an intolerance to other people's opinions. So being rude to transphobes, that's bigotry in and of itself.
That's true.
So never mind. But rudeness is good, but just not the kind I don't like, which, okay. We're not looking for consistency here, is it? But anyway, so to this massive thread, Vorsh replies and just gives a dismissive remark. And he's just like, look, he's being his typical self online, I would say. And he says, apparently one of them leaked the conversation, but I couldn't find out. Who cares? Her responses were so bizarre and alien and disconnected from what I was saying that I genuinely didn't know if there was a difference between her choosing not to listen and being capable of understanding. To be honest with you, I think Kat's the one operating in good faith here, because Vorsh always acts in bad faith. But to this, ContraPoints replied. Now, ContraPoints is, and I've spoken to Vorsh and ContraPoints, but I've never spoken to Cat Black.
Right.
But ContraPoints I actually quite like and seems like a nice person. Vorsh is obviously not a good person, and I don't really know that much about Cat Black beyond the videos I've watched first. But this is interesting because ContraPoints usually stays above this. She's the queen of BreadTube. She tries to avoid all of this. And so the fact that she got involved in this is very interesting and gave Vorsh a big win. He ends up winning this exchange, and I'll show you why. So she says, I think you should think about what you're saying here instead of getting really defensive about her correctly pointing out that your perspective on this is limited by your not being trans and not being a woman. So ContraPoints is citing the intersectional doctrine of the epistemology of the oppressed.
Yeah, it's lived experience.
Exactly.
Trumps all.
She's saying, stay in your lane.
Yeah.
And she's calling rank and pulling authority over Vorsh based on identity politics. Vorsh, being a straight white man, can sit down and shut up. ContraPoints is a trans person. Cat Black is a trans person. Vorsh needs to be quiet. She says, doing edgy, ironic misogyny while defending trans people magnifies the grain of truth in what TERFs say about there being misogyny in trans activism. but you're admitting that the TERFs are right, that there is misogyny in trans activism, and you're trying to paper it over and pointing the finger at Vorsh and saying he's the problem, but he isn't the problem. The problem is, as the TERFs have been saying, the attack on the category of woman. Maybe your tweet at JK didn't land the way you wanted. Okay, fine, it happens, but why get so defensive about reasonable criticism? Bro, have you met Vorsh? Come on. Right? So Vorsh replies to this saying ContraPoint simply doesn't understand the context and what's happening. And says, basically, I'm extremely confident you'd agree with me if you were fully caught up, which is typical. To which ContraPoints replies, it just strikes me as off that you're extremely confident that you know better than a trans woman who has been doing this activism for over a decade. It kind of compounds my discomfort with the women be quieter tweet. So this pure identity politics argument, Vorsh is wrong because of what he is, not because of what his opinions are. And Cat Black, and of course by extension ContraPoints, are right because they are what they are. So Vorsh replies with, is that really your argument? That I, by way of being cis, couldn't possibly be correct in a disagreement on trans issues with a trans person? Can't believe I'm agreeing with Vorsh. Like, I can't believe he's right about this. But this is exactly the argument I would make in this situation.
But the thing is, it's not actually about who right or wrong, because they don't really care about that. What they're actually caring about, as she goes on to say, is confidence. Because they want to undermine the confidence of their opponents. That's entirely what it is, based on their identity.
And it's also about hierarchy. Notice that Vorsh is merely incapable, simply incapable, of making a correct assertion in the face of his betters. That's what's happening here. And so she misunderstands what he has to say and says, I haven't heard any arguments yet, only your assurance that you're extremely confident that you're correct. I don't think extreme confidence is warranted. Men who are extremely confident they know more than women what is and isn't misogyny don't have a great track record. So she misread what he said there. He's not saying her argument. He's saying that her argument, not the argument he is representing. He's waiting to hear what she's actually asserting. Because ContraPoints has merely by framing only asserted identity politics. And so this is all people could really read from what ContraPoints has said here. It's like, I'm trans, therefore I'm better than you, therefore I'm right. You're a white man, you're worse than me, you're incorrect, you don't know what you're talking about.
Be less confident.
Be less confident, exactly, which is not really a nice thing to say to anyone. But, I mean, who cares? So, in response to this, ContraPoints tweeted out and then deleted the next tweet. So, is IDPOL, Identity Politics, and the new SJW, have we moved on from woke so soon? And she deleted this, and Vorsh actually replied to this just with, in before the delete. I can't believe they're allowing Vorsh to cover himself in glory.
Yeah.
He got the better of them in this. And then she says, are you done being mad that some trans women disagree that being misogynistic is actually an intricate strategy for being our saviour? And Vorsh replies that this is just not the argument, because it's not. The argument is Vorsh allowed a valid opinion on transgender issues as a white man? And the answer is no, because he's at the bottom of the hierarchy. And she replies with, so you didn't defend misogyny, but you do defend misogyny in the service of saving the transgenders. I honestly don't get it. It's maddening to watch you pose as the saviour of transgenders, then do edgy misogyny in the name of that, and finally melt down when a trans woman who knows more than you criticises you for it. And Vorsh responds to her with, is this not what the woke scold types said to you? I'm not trying to be anyone's saviour. I'm a guy with the arguments, which you've admitted you're unaware of, and still somehow you have strong opinions of them. This is highly ironic, given all of these people are woke scolds. I'm not a woke scold. No, you're all woke scolds. This is what woke scolding is. You're engaging in it right now. And so the conclusion of this is that ContraPoints blocks Vorsh.
Hey.
There we go. No. Think about that, right? Yeah. So Vorsh has successfully challenged an aristocratic power structure, and all ContraPoints. We can go to the next one. Just so you can see the block. It's always worth having up. There we go. So what this has done is ContraPoints has got to the guillotining. I have nothing that I can reply to you with because you are right. You've exposed the hierarchical nature of the power structure of the progressive ideology, upon which I sit as one of the people near the very top. Cat Black is slightly above because she's black. And this is all the future of leftist politics. It's just patrolling language by people who are hypothetically oppressed by this language use. And Vorsh is in fact showing how he is punching up by criticising these people, because he is relegated to a lower position in the movement about equality. And so they're asserting their privilege to be at the top. And this argument is literally only right because of who they are and because of who Vorsh is. And this, again, it's why Rowling is such an absolute thorn in their side, because Rowling is essentially making the same argument to them.
Right.
You are not women. You are men posing as women, and they are just cascading that down to Vorsh. And so they can't say Rowling is wrong when she points out this, because she's not wrong. And Vorsh is a bit of a useful idiot in this regard because he's exposing this hierarchy for what it is. I suspect this hierarchy will be temporary, though, because all of these things are based essentially on lies.
Yep.
You know, you can't maintain lies indefinitely. But if you want to know more about this, you can watch my critical race theory video, CRT Explained number 2, The Epistemology of Oppression. This is how the intersectionals get to the conclusion that actually it is the innate lived experience of those aristocrats at the top of the hierarchy that we should be paying attention to.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content we have on the site, such as the Contemplation series, this one being on how the government controls your behavior by Josh and John. And if you want to follow Josh, you can always follow him at Getter at @Josh_firm. Thank you and goodbye.